It's March 2026. 3 weeks into Operation Epic Fury, President Trump has declared total victory. Washington is broadcasting absolute supremacy, the Iranian Navy sits on the bottom of the sea, and their missile factories are smoking ruins. But if you look at the Strait of Hormuz, global shipping has stopped. Rather than sending the US Navy to protect commercial tankers, the administration is demanding allied nations help. If Washington has achieved total victory, why is the US Navy holding its multi-billion-dollar destroyers outside the strait? The Pentagon is staring at the reality of modern drone warfare. Washington started this fire, but when it comes to the actual consequence of this war, 20% of the world's oil halted at a contested choke point, the Pentagon refuses to move its ships. Instead, Donald Trump is piling pressure on NATO allies to step up and help secure these vital shipping lanes. He has publicly warned that the alliance could face a very bad future if members fail to act. He has made his frustration clear, stating that allies have not been enthusiastic about getting involved and should be doing far more to protect their own economic interests. This sentiment extends directly to Whitehall, where Washington is reportedly not happy with the level of support being offered by the UK as it pushes European nations to contribute their own naval forces to the effort. The international response remains icy. That resistance has been explicit in some capitals. Germany's Defence Minister Boris Pistorius flatly rejected the request, stating, "This is not our war, we didn't start it." France has taken a similarly cautious line, ruling out sending warships during the conflict and signalling it will not be drawn into what many European leaders see as a widening war. Faced with this outright rejection, the White House has changed its rhetoric. In a recent Truth Social broadcast, Trump claimed the US no longer needs or desires Allied assistance, declaring, "Speaking as President of the United States of America, we do not need the help of anyone." China and India are also refusing military involvement, and are instead negotiating directly with Iran for safe passage, while Gulf governments stay completely silent to avoid increased Iranian retaliatory strikes on their own infrastructure. To open the Strait of Hormuz, one of two things can happen. The US either signs a ceasefire with a regime it just spent weeks bombing, or the US Navy starts escorting the tankers themselves. But there is a massive political calculation currently preventing that second option. Having just declared total victory on the world stage, the administration simply cannot afford the global optics of a $2 billion American destroyer taking damage and casualties from a low-tier drone. A single video of a damaged US warship broadcast across the global news networks would instantly shatter the narrative of maritime supremacy. This leaves Washington with a volatile set of options. The White House might eventually be forced to order the escorts, but this might be done on a strictly transactional basis, using the US Navy to exclusively protect the tankers bound for nations that pay up or fall in line. Alternatively, if the blockade holds and the oil markets crash, the administration has already laid the groundwork to wash its hands of the crisis entirely, pinning the resulting global economic disaster squarely on NATO's refusal to act. And the reason nobody, including the US Navy, wants to risk their ships in that strait comes down to a brutal mathematic reality about drone warfare. The backbone of the US surface fleet, and the global benchmark for an air defense destroyer, is the Arleigh Burke class. With its spy radar array, Aegis combat system, and 96 vertical launch cells, a Flight 3 Burke is a $2.2 million apex predator. But those 96 cells are the absolute limit of the ship's firepower. A Burke does not go to sea with 96 air defense interceptors. A standard combat layout splits those tubes across multiple missions. In a typical 96 cell configuration, you might find 50 standard missiles for long-range area defense, 32 evolved Sea Sparrow missiles quad-packed in just 8 cells for close-in threats, 30 Tomahawk land attack cruise missiles, and 8 anti-submarine rockets. The primary threat in the Gulf right now is the shore-launched Shahed 136 drone. A Shahed costs roughly $20,000. To shoot it down, the US Navy fires SM-2 or a Naval Sea Sparrow missile interceptor costing roughly $2 million each. If the IRGC launches a swarm of 100 drones from mobile coastal launchers, Iran spends $2 million. To achieve a 100% interception rate, assuming one shot, one kill, a single destroyer has to empty its entire air defense magazine, burning through hundreds of millions of dollars of missiles in a matter of minutes. Mass defeats cutting-edge quality in a war of attrition. Once those tubes are empty, the ship is down to its close-in weapon system against follow-on attacks by more air or surface drones or anti-ship missiles. You cannot reload a VLS cell under combat conditions at sea. This is why the Pentagon is reluctant to escort civilian tankers through the 21 nautical mile wide Strait of Hormuz. Parking a destroyer inside the minimum reaction envelope of a cheap, land-based asymmetrical weapon turns an escort into the primary target. This arithmetic gets substantially worse when you look at potential ground operations. To force a surrender, US planners are evaluating seizing Karg Island. This 20 square kilometer rock handles 90% of Iran's crude oil exports, and it sits just 16 miles off the Iranian mainland. If US Marines land on Karg, they'll need continuous air defense from the Naval Task Force. To provide that umbrella, US Navy destroyers must patrol the narrow, 16-mile wide channel directly between the island and the hostile mainland. Stationing a warship in this constrained space strips the destroyer of its primary defense, distance. Do the basic maths. If a US Navy destroyer patrols 4 miles off Karg Island to support the Marines, it sits exactly 12 miles off the Iranian mainland. The Spy-6 radar on the Burke class sits roughly 30 meters above the waterline. Against a sea-skimming target flying at 10 meters, the physical curvature of the Earth creates a radar horizon of about 25 miles. In the open ocean, the ship sees the threat coming with minutes to spare. But the strait between Karg and the mainland is not open ocean. The Iranian coastline is lined with rocky ridges. Radar waves travel in straight lines. They cannot look through solid rock. When the IRGC fires a subsonic anti-ship missile or a drone from a mobile launcher hidden behind those mountains, the destroyer's radar detects absolutely nothing at launch. The ship only acquires the target when the weapon crests the ridges and drops down towards the water. That makes the detection range the distance to the beach or nearest ridge, roughly 12 miles. A standard subsonic anti-ship missile travels at roughly 600 miles per hour, which is 10 miles every minute. To cover that 12-mile stretch of water, the weapon takes just 72 seconds. The Aegis combat system requires several seconds to verify the radar track, classify the threat, assign a weapon, and physically open the VLS cell doors. By the time the ship has a firing solution, the crew has around 60 seconds of actionable warning time to shoot down a weapon flying just feet above the waves. And that assumes that they've performed flawlessly. The crew of that warship must maintain readiness 24 hours a day for days on end. We have seen this play out before. In 1982, during the Falklands War, the Royal Navy had to protect a highly vulnerable amphibious landing force packed into the confined waters of San Carlos. To take the pressure off Bomb Alley, British commanders deliberately pushed a Type 42 destroyer and a Type 22 frigate forward to act as a combined missile trap. In theory, it was a brilliant synergy. The Type 42 provided long-range Sea Dart area defense, and the Type 22 provided short-range Seawolf point defense. Their entire job was to sit in the threat axis, draw the fire of incoming Argentine strike aircraft, and act as a shield for the troop ships in San Carlos. And it worked. The picket ship successfully stripped the momentum from the Argentine air attacks. But in constrained waters just off the coast, the lack of reaction time and the mathematics of saturation eventually catch up with you. HMS Coventry was overwhelmed and sunk. HMS Broadsword was damaged. They took the hits so the landing force wouldn't have to. But unlike 1982, the adversary isn't sending a handful of jets with iron bombs and a few Exocet missiles. The IRGC is holding thousands of air and surface drones as well as subsonic cruise missiles, perfectly positioned to saturate the airspace from multiple vectors simultaneously. If a US commander parks a destroyer in the littoral waters of Carg Island, they are placing a high-value asset off a modern-day bomb alley. The sheer volume of cheap munitions could overwhelm the finite number of interceptors. Once the magazines are dry, the ship needs to scarper. Now the truth is, this crisis could go in one of a number of different directions. The conflict might conclude tomorrow with a negotiated ceasefire acceptable to all parties. The US Navy, whether they go it alone or finally bully their allies into assisting, could escort these tankers through the strait and face absolutely zero resistance from the Iranian coast. President Trump may even order a full-scale invasion, and that terrifying swarm of 1,000 drones may never actually materialize. Or it does. From a pure optics perspective, the White House is reluctant to take that gamble. Having already declared victory, the political cost of a burning US destroyer broadcast across the globe is simply too high. They will not risk the ships until they absolutely have to. If you were the US commander, if an invasion were ordered, would you risk a destroyer between the Marines on Carg Island and Iran, or does the US Navy need to sit further offshore, which puts the Marines at much greater risk? For those of you that know your history, this is an interesting parallel to Guadalcanal in World War II. Thanks for watching.